How's it going, everybody? Today we have new moon in Pisces horoscopes for you. All of these horoscopes are for your rising sign, but of course you can watch them from your sun sign or your moon sign, whatever gets you off. Anyway, these rising sign horoscopes are actually clips over from my Patreon. Every single month I do rising sign horoscopes for each zodiac sign, and I go into detail every major transit for the month ahead. So if you're interested in that and you want to support the channel, consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon. The link's, of course, in the description below, and I hope you enjoy. So this next slide is for the 20th. It will be the new moon in Pisces, and Venus will enter Aries. But before that, on the 14th, Venus will conjoin Neptune. That's on Valentine's Day, essentially. And there will be this kind of like romanticizing some of your, the 12th house is like isolation, alienation, hidden enemies, fears, phobias. Venus is in your 12th house where like mentally, maybe you're doing a little bit better. Maybe mentally you're kind of enjoying your private space and your alone time and working things out. And Venus conjoining Neptune is just like basking in that, like actually finding pleasure in it. But at the same time, a few days after that, that's happening on the 14th on Valentine's Day. Whoops. And then right after that on the 16th, we're going to have the sun conjoin Saturn. So there will be this kind of, low when it comes to, come on, pencil. Okay. So I'm trying to do the erase thing and it's not working. Anyway, there will be this kind of low with friendships, but then we get this new moon in Pisces where I think you kind of are like, all right, this is who my friends are. This is who my friends aren't. I don't need to socialize all the time. And as the new moon goes into your 12th house, this is sort of again, making peace with things. We are about to have Saturn enter this 12th house, enter your 12th house, where there will be this big, massive change when it comes to both your career and your friendships related to privacy, isolation, being more by yourself, being more behind the scenes. And I think as the new moon happens there, this is clearing out the Pisces energy for more things to go in. But at the same time, on the 20th, Venus enters Aries, where I think you're going to kind of get this, spark, like maybe it's like, you know what, fuck my friends. Like, I love that Joe. I don't know if you guys know who Joey D is, the comedian is, but, there's this clip of him and he's like, fuck the drugs, fuck the cigarettes, fuck that bitch. We're going to just fucking, you need to go out and kill shit. And that Venus and Aries spark is very exciting in my opinion. You're going to be looking better. You're going to be feeling better. You're going to be feeling more fierce too. Kind of like, not just like more sexy and more attractive, but kind of like also more edgy. Like, you know what? Like I am hot. Let me put on, my stilettos. Let me put on, some red lipstick kind of stuff. You're going to be feeling more attractive. You're going to be feeling more fierce. And I think as the new moon in Pisces in your 12th house happens, it's kind of eliminating a lot of these fears and just kind of being okay with going out on your own and doing your own thing. So I really like this new moon for you. And then really after that, the only thing that we have is on the 22nd, Mercury's going to trine Mars, where again, there is this sort of something connecting with friendships where it's not like, oh my God, I have all the best friends ever, but maybe, along the way you have someone that you can communicate to and talk to where it's at least something, you know what I mean? Maybe even reaching out to an old friend. But let's go ahead and jump over to Taurus. But that really brings us to the 20th, where we have the new moon in Pisces as Venus enters Aries. This is where the friendships change for you guys, because as your 11th ruler goes in the 12th, there's this sort of like, oh, these people aren't my friends. Oh, I actually don't really want to go out that much. And this is the new moon in your 11th. This is clearing out all of the energy for Saturn to go into later on in 2023. And so as this new moon happens, this is a big focus on friendships, your networks, your community, and your 11th ruler is in the 12th. Like, do you really need all these friends? Do you need to be going and socializing all that much? Or do you or would you rather value your alone time? I think the other thing is your ascendant ruler is Venus, and she's going into detriment in your 12th, where I think you might even be a little bit insecure, like being like, maybe someone made fun of you, or maybe someone said something. You're like, I don't want to be with these people anymore. I don't want to socialize. I don't want to be, seen by the public. I want to just be by myself. There will be some sort of health challenges, possibly. I put that at a very minimum. It's just your 6th ruler of ill health and your ascendant ruler of good health going into detriment in the 12th, where, again, it's winter, maybe you get a little bit sick. Maybe you're going out and you're drinking and your immune system's low and you're like, fuck, I need to stay home. And this new moon in your 11th is clearing out the way for Saturn to go here. You are going to have to be facing more responsibility with your friendships and taking on more discipline with your friendships and being more restrictive of who you allow in your inner circle. And as your 11th ruler goes in the 12th, your 11th ruler is in the 12th, but as your ascendant ruler goes in the 12th, I think there's this sort of reflection on like, who are my friends? Who do I associate with? And what do I, it's kind of like spending time alone and realizing what your own bullshit is, essentially. And that's kind of how we end the month. I mean, after that, on the 22nd, we will have Mercury trining Mars. So I think this will be a good time to figure out your money. Like if you've been ignoring your bank account, you've been ignoring your finances, this is like, all right, maybe you get a little extra bonus in your check and you're like, all right, maybe I need to reorganize my finances here. Maybe it's time I can actually look at this with a sober lens. So your money issues start to get figured out around this time, and that's Taurus. Then we get to the 20th. This one's a really big deal because this is the new moon in Pisces. This is the time to really wipe clean the career, the work, all of that stuff. Saturn is going to be entering your 10th house, and it will be there for the next 3 years. Saturn is going to give you responsibility. Saturn's going to give you duty. Saturn's going to give you restrictions. Saturn's going to, call into question your maturity. Saturn's going to ask you to be more responsible. And this new moon is really like, hey, I need to clean this area up and get ready for the next 3 years. What am I doing with my life? At that same time, Venus is going to enter Aries, where this is the funny part, is your 12th ruler is entering the 11th house. So there is this kind of like, maybe going out with people that isn't good for you, but it's fun. It's your 5th ruler of love, romance, sex, pleasure, recreation, creativity in your 11th house. It's in detriment in your 11th house. So there's this sort of like having fun and doing things maybe you're not supposed to be doing. But Jupiter's in your 11th house, right? There is this sort of increase with friendships and at least this reflection in this kind of like, what do I believe about my friends? I mean, Jupiter is your 10th ruler of career and your 7th ruler of relationships in your 11th house. So it's like, how do I utilize the network of people that I have for an increase in my career? But this is the new moon in your 10th. I think this would be a really good time to clean the slate with your career and your ambitions and kind of get ready for the next 3 years of a lot of discipline and maturity here. It is having fun with friends, but kind of at a detriment again. Like, don't do any self-sabotage stuff. But there is this level of kind of like, doing things that are fun that might get you a little bit in trouble, but maybe being a little risque is what, Mars, maybe that's Mars remediation, right? So that's what's going on for February for the Gemini risings. Let's go ahead and go into Cancer. We get to the 20th though, and this is when we have the new moon in Pisces. This is really important because Saturn is going to be entering your 9th house for the next 3 years. So this is the time to clear up this whole area of your beliefs, far distance travel, learning, higher education. Saturn's going to be asking you to take more responsibility, more discipline, more, and being more mature in this area. And this is your 7th ruler and 8th ruler. So it's like, for one, a lot of relationships will come along the way, like teachers, like some elders, but it's also your 8th house ruler. So we're talking about, the occult, secrets, shared resources, and it's going to be going into your 9th house. So this might even be taking debt out for school. This might even be going back to school for a lot of you. But this new moon is allowing you the opportunity to clear out this whole area of, again, especially like if you wanted to do a social media cleanse, if you wanted to, maybe you do your work through social media, like this would be a really big focus on rebranding. Because the other point is Venus enters Aries. Venus is your 11th ruler of friends, and it's going to be in detriment in your 10th. So you might get a little bit of haters. It's also your 4th ruler in detriment in the 10th. I think you're just kind of ignoring, by this point, you're kind of starting to ignore home and family stuff because you have career stuff that you need to take care of, which isn't always bad. But this new moon in your 9th is like, let's clear up those beliefs. Let's clear up, the junk and the gunk of like, if you have like a goal, and you don't have the belief that's going to take you to that goal, this is the time to clear that up. And this is Venus in Aries. It's kind of like Venus in Aries sometimes remind me like, this is like a total movie trope of like the nerdy girl, like does her hair and makeup and is like all of a sudden super sexy. Like that's kind of like this energy of like, maybe you've been a little like not hot, like this is the time to put the hotness out there. Venus is going to conjoin your 10th ruler. There's a lot of like, again, this is really the time. Like I've told so many of my Cancer rising clients, as much as you guys have been going through shit, like this is the time to start any ambitious career, like if you want to start your own business or, advance in your career, this is the time to do it while Jupiter's in your 10th. You're not going to really see this come to full fruition until 2026, 2027, but that's okay. You have to get started now, and then you'll work your way up to that point. But Venus in Aries is just being like, it's like lying on the resume. Like if it doesn't matter, just get the fucking job. You know what I mean? Venus in Aries is like just lying on the resume essentially. But it looks fun. It looks enjoyment. And you just kind of have to, like the new moon in your 9th house, like you're going to have to kind of get rid of some beliefs in order for you to step into that energy. And then after that, on the 22nd, the only other thing is Mercury's going to be trining Mars. And this is just kind of, seeing a different perspective. Like, again, it's kind of helping you, Mars is in your 12th house where all these fears and all these distractions are getting in your way. I think at this point, there's some access to, other information that kind of, mental gymnastics and kind of rationalizes things to where it's not so difficult. And Mercury will square Uranus, which is just kind of like, don't let your friends might be a little bit weird about debts. Yeah, Mercury square Uranus, I would just be careful about like what you tell people essentially. But that is for the Cancer rising. So let's go ahead and go to Leo. And then we get to the 20th where two things are going on. One, we have the new moon in your 8th house. This is super important because this new moon is clearing up everything for the next 3 years. Starting in March, Saturn is going to be entering your 8th house, where Saturn is about restriction, discipline, responsibility, maturity, walls, barriers, and it's going into your 8th house of death, of other people's money, of shared resources, of debt. And this is where you have to take this area of your life very seriously. But this new moon is really allowing you that time and that space. And I would really take advantage of this because Saturn's literally just minutes away from moving into Pisces, and take advantage of this of like, all right, for example, your 8th house ruler of debt is in your 9th house of higher education. Maybe you're thinking about taking out debt to go back to school. Maybe you're thinking about taking out debt to, travel. The 9th house is spirituality, astrology, far distance travel, higher education, publishing, broadcasting. So there's all of this increase with your education related to the 8th house. So like secrets, things that are hidden. And this new moon is like, you need to clear all of this up to get ready for Saturn. Saturn's going to be, for one, the ruler of your 6th house of work and labor, and your 7th house of relationships, and it's going into your 8th house of debt and other people's money, where there's going to be this sort of restriction and discipline that you need to take on in this area. But this new moon is allowing you the space to kind of be like, all right, I need to look at this area. And like, again, if you are going to take out debt, or if you are going to give someone else money, or you are going to take care of someone, you got to financially plan for that. You have to understand what you're getting yourself into. This is the 8th house. So this is a house that's in aversion to the ascendant. So you're not, the thing is with the 8th house, for example, with death, you don't know when people are going to die. Like you don't know when the 8th house is other people's money. You don't always know what other people have and what they don't have. But when you have transits in the 8th house, it's these very small time periods where you kind of have access to that information. And so as the new moon's happening here, it's like, let's look at this area of other people's business, of other people's stuff. Let's clear all of this out, and let's get ready for what is to come for the next 3 years. Venus also enters Aries, where this seems kind of fun for the most part. I mean, it's the two benefics in your 9th house. So learning, spirituality, social media, there's all this increase, and there's this fun here. It's also your 10th ruler of your career, your reputation, your legacy. There's this kind of having fun in this area. But it's at a detriment, right? It's like Venus in Aries. It's kind of like Venus in Aries is it's edgy. It's not necessarily like, Venus in Aries, like Venus in Taurus is like, excuse me for my analogies that might be somewhat inappropriate, but it's just an easy way to explain it. It's like Venus in Taurus is like very trad wife, like very like, beautiful, simple, like trad wife, versus Venus in Aries is like, excuse me for my language here, but like very like harlot energy of like, like, yeah, I'm bad, or yeah, I'm going to do things that are, fun and adventurous and exciting. It's Venus the sign of pleasure and the sign of Mars of like, aggression and, confrontation and like, bad things, right? So that doesn't always mean everything bad, but like as Venus is in Aries, that kind of embodiment of that energy of like, I'm going to explore things that I find interesting or edgy that maybe I should. It's like, it's like when an authority tells you not to do something, it makes you want to do something. And that's kind of like where you're at with education and your spirituality and your beliefs. And there's this sort of looking at things through a much more edgy, much more confrontational lens, which looks pretty fun. And then by the 22nd, we're going to have Mercury trine Mars. And I think this is just establishing a connection with a relationship, right? Like if you've been having these issues with friendships, I think Mercury going into your 7th house and trining Mars is kind of rationalizing it, kind of working it out, especially related to home and family, like in living situation stuff, where it's sort of a detached feeling, but at least the communication can happen by the 22nd. So that's the Leo risings for February. As we move forward, though, to the 20th, this is where we have the new moon in Pisces. This one is really important because this new moon is allowing you to clean up and clear out all of the relationship stuff in your life of like, all right, we're moving on to something else. And for the next, Saturn's going to be entering your 7th house in March. Saturn will be in your 7th house for the next 3 years. So as we go into the next 3 years till 2026, this is about commitment. This is about responsibility. This is about maturity. This is about discipline, about walls, barriers, and limitations with relationships. So a lot of you really need to get serious about this area. A lot of you are looking at commitments. A lot of you are looking at, like, if you're in a long-term committed relationship, it's like, hey, there's going to be some more restrictions coming up here. There's always different seasons in relationships. And I think for you guys, as Jupiter went through your 7th house, I got a lot of those wrong because I was kind of expecting a lot more people to get in relationships, the Virgo risings, when Jupiter went through there through through the beginning of 2022. But as Jupiter went through there was all this kind of like look at your beliefs of relationships. And now as Saturn goes through there's this sort of like, hey, let's bring it down to earth. Let's be more realistic. Like, what do you want in the long run? But this new moon is allowing you to like clean all that up, clear that out, because you've got a lot of things coming in with relationships. And this is just a big focus of like, again, that Neptune shit of like, where have you been delusional? Where have you been too romanticized? Where have you been like, what is actually fucking realistic? And I think in society nowadays, we're just sold these ridiculous ideas of what relationships are supposed to be. You know what I mean? So maybe this is just coming back down to earth. At the same time, though, Venus will enter Aries. Venus rules your 2nd house of money, as well as your 9th house of, again, spirituality, religion, publishing, far distance travel. She's going into detriment in your 8th house. So this might be kind of like, again, the 8th house is debt, other people's money. So again, maybe more people are reliant on your resources. Maybe you have some debts that you need to pay off now that you're having some money. Jupiter's in your 4th house, and I've talked a lot about a lot of the Virgo risings potentially having a death in the family and getting some type of inheritance. This is when some of this might come up. Between now and like late April is when all of that might come up. But this is kind of like really focusing on like, okay, your 2nd ruler of money is in detriment in the 8th house, where maybe you need to spend money on something that you need. Maybe you need to go into debt a little bit or pay off your debt. That's really what this is looking like here. And then once we get to the 22nd, Mercury is going to make this trine to Mars, where this is really kind of working things out with your schedule, your work, your habits, and your career. It's like all this back and forth with your work and your career and all these issues. And as Mercury's in Aquarius, it's like, all right, I've gotten a rational sense of how to organize myself and to work things out. So by the 20th, the work stuff is starting to look a lot easier. And it will be easier once Saturn goes into your 7th and Mars leaves your 10th, by the way. And then as we move over to the 20th, this is when we get the new moon in Pisces. This is super important because this is, again, it's a new moon, so it's a time to clean up, clear out, focus all of your attention on one area and, like start new in an area. But this is your 6th house. We're talking about work. We're talking about pets. We're talking about health, habits, day-to-day routines, physical labor. That's something that so many people get twisted up all the time. Is the 10th house is just simply your title. Like, it's much more reputational and legacy oriented, like, versus the 6th house is like legitimate labor. Like, what are you actually doing? For example, like if you are let's say you work in tech, you might be like, I'm a software engineer. And, that can mean 1,000 different fucking things, but like, what does that labor look like? And that's the 6th house. And this is the time to clean up and clear out this area and get ready, because Saturn's going to be moving into your 6th house for the next 3 years. There's going to be a lot more responsibility and discipline being taken on with your work, with your labor, with your pets, with your health. So a lot of you need to get your health in check if you haven't already. But this is your 4th ruler of home and family, and your 5th ruler of creativity, love, romance, sex, pleasure, going in your 6th house. It's like, it's time to get creative in this area. It's time to take this area a lot more seriously. But this is not happening yet. This will happen in March, which we'll talk about. But this is just the time to clean up this area and get ready for what's to come over the next 3 years. At that same time, Venus moves into Aries. This is where your 1st house ruler is in detriment in your 7th house, where, this is kind of like, Jupiter's in your 7th house of relationships. So there's all of this increase with relationships. But as Venus is in Aries, it's maybe getting into trouble, doing things that aren't necessarily good for you. I made the analogy, I think, in the Virgo or the Leo rising horoscope. But like Venus in Aries, and again, maybe this isn't the most appropriate analogy, but it's kind of like Venus in Taurus is so like trad wife, like very basic, very simple. Like Venus in Aries is like nerd girl turns into like sexy, like, risque, edgy type girl. And as Venus goes into your 7th house, there's sort of this like edgy, risky feeling that you're going to be taking on with relationships. But it's Venus conjoining Jupiter too. So it's kind of like, Venus and Aries loves the drama. They love fighting. They love the like intensity of everything. And that's what's going on in relationships at this point too. So it's Venus conjoining Jupiter. It's really fun. It's really good. But you might be kind of like doing something that's a little bit risky, or kind of like getting invested into something that is a little bit risky. But it's fun, like doing things that aren't, that you're not supposed to do is fun sometimes. It's just there's consequences for your actions. So understand that if you fuck around, you will find out. But then after that, the only other thing is on the 22nd, Mercury is going to be trining Mars. And I think this is just understanding things a little bit better. Mars is in your 9th house, where there's been all of this questioning of your beliefs, questioning of where you're going in life, your relationship to God. And, Mercury's now in your 5th house, again, creativity, love, romance, like rationalizing everything that's going on here. Like, what are you actually disciplined and committed to? And especially for those that, do creative work or doing school work, this is kind of like, okay, I understand what I want, and how that reflects my beliefs, and how that reflects, what I need to be doing in order to go in that direction, if that makes sense. So that's the Libra risings. Let's go ahead and go to Scorpio. Then we get to the 20th, technically. I know this is the 19th. But pretty much on the 20th, we're going to be having the new moon in Pisces. This is really important, because this is in the next, Saturn is about to literally enter your 5th house. For the next 3 years, there's much more focus on responsibility, duty, maturity, walls, limitations, when it comes to the 5th house. So love, romance, sex, pleasure, drugs, alcohol, children. And this is where you're going to be taking this part of your life a lot more seriously. Do you want kids? Do you, abuse drugs and alcohol? Like, do you need to be more sober? If you're a creative person, where do you need to be more disciplined in this area? If you, have a creative venture that you want to take on, why aren't you doing it? Are you not having fun? If you're not having fun, that's a big part of your life that is important. Maybe you need to be doing that. Also too, your 5th house ruler is in the 6th. So love, fun, romance, sex, all that stuff is in your 6th ruler of coworkers, health. This might even be taking your health a lot more seriously. That might be coming back up with, like, partying and shit like that. But this new moon is really clearing out this space for you guys, because this next 3 years is going to be taking this whole area of your life a lot more seriously and seeing this with a much more sober lens. And this new moon is kind of beginning all of that stuff, because the sun will be in Pisces as Saturn enters Pisces, as Mercury enters Pisces, and all of that shit. So really taking this area of your life very seriously. Venus will, though, also move into Aries, where this is where you might start seeing some health issues. And when I say health issues, like, take that with a grain of salt. I'm not saying you're going to fucking get diagnosed with cancer or something like that. But this is your 12th ruler of hospitals, isolation, alienation, hidden enemies, and it's going into your 6th ruler of coworkers, pets, health, day-to-day activities, labor. Some of you might have some shitty coworkers that come after you. That's also true because Venus rules your 7th house of like individual relationships. There might be this kind of like all this relationship stuff too might come into a little bit more of a question of like, what are we doing here? What do I want? Maybe not liking what exactly it is that you have. Maybe having more fun, but it's Venus and Aries. So like if you have a problem with a coworker, this is like, rather than being like, oh, I'm not going to do anything, this might be like snapping back and having a little bit more fun with it. But as Venus enters your 6th house, it's like this is going to be a big focus. Like it's the two benefics. One of them is in detriment in your 6th house of work and health. And it's kind of like, hey, you need to take this area of your life a lot more seriously. You need to be thinking about this area a lot more, maybe having a little bit more fun. But if that fun is at your own expense, especially at your health's expense, like then maybe like you need to reframe what fun is. And then by the time we get to the 22nd, this is when Mercury's going to trine Mars. So I really like this because as Mercury's in your 4th house, and we're kind of just rationalizing this whole living situation stuff for you guys, it trines Mars. It's making that connection to your 1st house ruler, right? And your 1st ruler is in the 8th. It's in aversion. So there's this huge disconnect in this like fear of everything that you've got going on. And I think as Mercury trines Mars, it's like, now that I've taken this area of my home and my family, more seriously, and I can see this in a more rational way without being so emotionally like triggered by it. Like this is kind of like connecting the dots of like, this is okay. This is easier. And so like enjoy what you can, but don't let yourself be deceived into something that's not real, right? Don't just idealize situations. And that's important because as we go to the 20th, we have the new moon here, where by the 20th, this is really clearing out this whole living situation area of like, I need to focus on my home and my family. Like for me personally, it's like, where am I living? What am I doing next? Because in March, Saturn enters your 4th house. And Saturn's going to be in your 4th house for the next 3 years. So the idea of taking more responsibility, being more mature, being more disciplined with your home, your family, and your living situation, having more limitations, having more walls and barriers and authority figures with your home and your family and your living situation is what's coming up for the next 3 years. And this new moon is allowing this time to really clear out this area to get ready for all that's about to enter, right? There's about to be a lot of changes coming up here soon. And this is this time to really focus on this area, clear out what you need to clear out, and get ready for new to come in. At the same time that happens, Venus enters Aries, where this is where, this is your 5th house. So love, romance, sex, creativity, pleasure, children, self-expression, partying. Your Venus, your 11th ruler of friends is going into detriment in the 5th. 6th ruler of detriment, 6th ruler is going into detriment in the 5th. This might be kind of like dealing with some health stuff, but also just like trying to have fun, maybe doing things that aren't good for you. Kind of having some fallout with some friends, but also like trying to have more fun with friends, even if it's not like Venus and Libra where like I'm enjoying my friends. It's like I'm enjoying social networks that are related to partying, self-expression, creativity, that kind of stuff. And Venus and Jupiter in here, like this is a big time to focus on your creativity. This is a big time to focus on love and romance and what you really want. And it's Venus and Aries. You got to sometimes take what you want, right? You sometimes have to go after what it is that you want. It's not just going to come waltzing up to you, which is really important. And then by the time we get to the end of the month, by the 22nd, this is when Mercury is going to make this trine to Mars. And this is where it becomes easier to communicate and rationalize everything, right? Mercury's in your 3rd house. You have what you have. You're using the tools at your disposal. And I think that really eliminates and helps alleviate some of the inflammation and the stress that you're having in relationships, especially to the creativity part and the part of like, this is the 12th house. So like isolation, hidden enemies, fears, phobias, stuff like that. Because by the 20th, we have the new moon in your 3rd house. This is a big deal because this is a time for you to focus. Like the 3rd house is also your schedule too. Like the 6th house is much more of your routines and habits. Habits aren't always conducive to like positivity. The 3rd house is like your errands, your schedule. What are you doing every single day? How are you organizing yourself? And as that new moon happens in your 3rd house, it's time to really focus on like your schedule, your routines. How do you spend your time and what do you need to be doing? How do you need to clear this area up? Especially related to home and family because your 3rd ruler is in the 4th. So a lot of this is, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, parents even related to. But it's time to really clear up this area because Saturn's moving in here. For the next 3 years, Saturn's going to be in Pisces. Saturn's moving into Pisces in March. So there is going to be much more responsibility, more discipline, more maturity, more limitations, more authorities that you're going to be dealing with in your 3rd house. So short distance travel, neighbors, siblings, again, all of that stuff. And if you need to get ready for this, because this is changing in the next this is changing next month, but it's going to be here for the next 3 years. And this new moon is kind of that opportunity to like, all right, I need to really clear out my schedule and really clear out my priorities because this is all changing really soon. And I need to get clear about what that change looks like. A lot of that has to do with home and family stuff and what your responsibilities are there. But once we get to the 22nd, we also have Mercury making a trine to Mars. And this is where the money stuff gets really worked out too. It's like, all right, you're getting a hold of your finances better. Saturn's almost out of there, okay? Like we're almost done with the problems with money and the limitations with money that you've had. But as it trines Mars, there's this sort of like getting in the groove of like, all right, maybe you've been working a job for a while and you were living paycheck to paycheck for a second. Now it's like, all right, maybe you opened up a savings account with a decent interest rate. And, maybe this is just a time to organize your money along with your time and your schedule a lot better. And this is where things really work out with that. So then by the time we get to the 20th, we have the new moon in Pisces. This is super important because the past 3 years we've had Saturn in Aquarius, right? You've become a completely different person, right? It's been a whole, shift in your literal body and your image and how you identify yourself. For the next 3 years, starting in March, Saturn's going to be entering Pisces and it will be in your second house, where these next 3 years are about getting very disciplined with your money, your finances, and your resources. This will deal with restrictions and limitations with them, but this will pretty much be a period of maturity with your money. But that starts with this new moon because this is a new moon. This is a time to look at your finances and your resources and say, how much money do I have? What do I have? What do I not have? Where do I spend my money? Where do I ignore things? Or where do I become too idealistic with things? Your second ruler of money is in your third house, which is really like, what do you do with your money? Do you invest it? Or are you saving it? Do you just spend it? But at the same time, Venus is entering Aries. Venus does rule your ninth house of spirituality and higher education and publishing and broadcasting and social media. And it's in detriment in your third, where this might be this kind of like knowing how to utilize what you know. Like that's what the ninth house is like, what you learned, right? Education. And the third house is how you use it. But that's in detriment, where it's like you go to do something that's like, okay, for example, if no one forgets how to ride a bike, but let's say you spent your whole childhood riding a bike and then you haven't rode a bike in 20 years and you get back on it. You're like, oh, this is a little strange. It's kind of like, I used to have a grandparent who he was like a crazy Vietnam War vet, super fun. But we used to have really big dirt jumps in our backyard, like huge BMX jumps. And one time he literally grabbed our bike and went to jump him. He was like in his 70s and he was hitting fucking 6-7 foot dirt jumps. And he fucking wrecked. And I think he broke his collarbone. He breaks like every bone all the time. But this is like that Venus in Aries. It's like, just because it's fun and exciting and you want to live a little edgy doesn't mean you might not fuck up shit. Venus also rules your fourth house of home and family. So you might have problematic neighbors at this time. Maybe you get into a confrontation with your neighbors. Be careful about that. You want to be respectful to your neighbors. Maybe your neighbors are kind of assholes to you. I'd really, make sure to not have problems with your neighbors because that can turn ugly. But there is a focus on shared siblings, neighbors, short distance travel. Maybe you have to spend money on your car. But this is that new moon in your second. Like this is a big focus on your money and how do you use your money? Where's your money going? And then by the 22nd, we have Mercury making a trine to Mars, where, Mars and Gemini, it's like, are you having fun? Are you enjoying what you're doing? Are you being creative? Are you having the sex that you want? Are you having the pleasure that you want? And as Mercury trines that, there's this level of like, now that you've kind of rationalized things and now that you can kind of understand what you want, it's going to be easier to communicate that and alleviate the stress in your life. So by the 22nd, it's just easier to communicate those things. But then we go to the 20th, and this is super important. The new moon is happening in your first house. New moon, new you. The difference being, though, is next month in March, Saturn is entering Pisces. Saturn is going to be in your first house for the next 3 years. Think about 2018 through 2020. What did you have to learn with friendships, with networks, with community? Where did you have to be more disciplined, more responsible, more mature? From 2020 to 2023, where did you realize, not everyone's your friend? Where did you distance yourself? Where did you self-sabotage? Where, what insecurities came up for you that held you back from everything? Where were you where were you a prisoner of your own mind? That's really important because as Saturn goes through your first house, a lot of this is realizing where you get in your own way. This is your 11th ruler going into the first. And again, this happens in March. So I'll be talking about this next month. But your 11th ruler goes into the first. This is going to be a time to make more constructive friendships. But your 12th ruler is going into the first too, where it's like, where are you getting in your own way, or where have you found yourself getting in your own way with this? And why this is important is, again, Saturn's going to enter here soon, but this new moon is like really cleaning up and clearing out your personality and your identity. It's like, okay, it needs to literally be a new moon, new you, and you need to replenish yourself and have a blank slate to start on. At the same time, Venus enters Aries. This is kind of spending money. Jupiter's in your second house, so you might be increasing your money, but this is also spending it. And I would be very careful about spending money, just because it's Venus in detriment. So just like, don't like impulse buy, don't impulse purchase that it's going to make you feel good, even though, because it's Venus in Aries. It's like, and for some of you that might be good. Like maybe you're making a little bit of money, maybe you want to spend a little bit. Just don't go overboard with it. Don't do something that you would eventually regret. But it's Venus in your second house of money and finances and resources. Venus knows how to spend money, and it's in detriment. It's like not making the best judgments with purchases. It's also your 8th house ruler of debt. Like, don't go into debt for something. That would be the most important thing. It's also your 3rd house. So cars, short distance travel, siblings, neighbors. There might be some expense that you have to, like especially related to a car, that you might have to purchase, and it takes up all that Jupiter and Aries money. But we get to the 22nd, and this is where Mercury is going to make a trine to Mars. And the thing is here, I think after you're still going to be spending this alone time and this isolated time. And I think as you've rationalized that and made your peace with it, it's going to alleviate this home and this family drama that you've got going on. It's going to be easier to communicate things with your home and your family and your living situation. So that begins to get alleviated until Mars actually leaves Gemini, which isn't until late March, early April. So that's the Pisces risings. That's February of 2023 for my lovely patrons. Thank you so much for watching this, guys. I'll be seeing you guys next month.